Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in Citadel 7 was a lie. Kalen tasted its metallic falsehood with every regulated breath. It was scrubbed, ionized, and recycled with relentless efficiency, stripped of every mote of dust, every errant microbe, every hint of the poisoned world outside. It was the sterile air of a tomb, and he was one of its keepers. He stood his post at the juncture of Sector Gamma and the primary conduit corridor, his pulse rifle held in a low-ready position that had been second nature for 20 years. The walls were polished alloy, reflecting his own distorted image, a man encased in graphite gray armor, his face obscured by a helmet that fed him the same processed air he despised. His world had been reduced to the hum of the Citadel's life support, the rhythmic clang of mag boots on the deck plating, and the silent weight of his own memories. He was a creature of protocol and routine, a ghost haunting the machine that powered the great lie on Ethel's surface. Above them, terraformers clawed at the heavens, attempting to force a dead moon to breathe. Down here, in the guts of the operation, men like Kalen ensured the system never faltered. He had once commanded men who broke worlds for the corporation. Now he guarded hallways. It was a long fall, but the landing had been quiet. He preferred the quiet. Ethel was a husk, a ball of gray dust and toxic grit orbiting a bloated, indifferent gas giant. The corporation, VCOR, had promised a new Eden, a jewel wrested from cosmic refuse. They sold hope to shareholders and indentured servitude to colonists. Kalen knew the truth. VCOR didn't build worlds. They consumed them. They had found something here, deep in the moon's crust, a power source of unimaginable output designated simply as Specimen 734. It was the heart of the entire operation, and its secrets were kept by men with far more authority than him. His chronometer chimed softly inside his helmet. The shift changed. He acknowledged the incoming guard, a young recruit named Sev, with a curt nod. Their helmets stared at each other, two insects in identical carapaces. No words were needed. Words were an inefficiency in the Citadel. Post is secure. Kalen's voice was a dry rasp through his internal calm. No incidents. Acknowledged, Sev replied, his voice still holding the sharp edge of academy training. He snapped to attention, a perfect statue of corporate obedience. Kalen turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous corridor. He did not head for the barracks. His new assignment sheet had come through an hour ago, a reassignment he had not requested. He was being moved to the core chamber, to the heart of the lie itself, a place no low-grade security officer was ever supposed to see. A knot of cold unease tightened in his gut. In his experience, unexpected changes in routine were rarely beneficial. They were loose threads, and pulling them often unraveled everything. The journey to the core chamber was a descent into the Citadel's deepest levels. Armored blast doors slid open before him, each one thicker than the last. The air grew colder, charged with a static hum that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. The polished alloy of the upper levels gave way to raw, unadorned duracrete, scarred by the boring machines that had carved this place from the moon's bedrock. He passed fewer and fewer personnel until he was entirely alone, his progress tracked by the unblinking red eyes of automated defense turrets that followed him with silent menace. He arrived at the final checkpoint, a massive circular vault door that bore the stark warning. Bioenergetic hazard, level 10 containment. Chief Engineer Eris was waiting for him. Eris was a remnant of an older era, a man whose face was a roadmap of burst capillaries and weary resignation. He held a data slate, his knuckles white. Kalen, Eris said, his voice gravelly. He didn't bother with pleasantries. You're on special detail. Orders from the administrator himself. Kalen remained silent, his helmet hiding his expression. Administrator Forlag was the architect of this entire operation, a man who saw the universe as a ledger of assets and liabilities. To draw his personal attention was to stand under the shadow of a falling mountain. Your orders are simple, Eris continued, avoiding Kalen's gaze. You stand here. You watch the readings. If the containment field flux deviates by more than 0.05%, you initiate a level 3 purge. No questions. No hesitation. You press the button. Understand. I understand the order, Kalen said, his tone flat. A purge meant flooding the chamber with a fast-acting neurotoxin and a de-energizing agent. It was an execution protocol. Eris finally looked at him, his eyes filled with a profound weariness. What you're about to see, just follow the protocol, son. For your own sake. He keyed a code into the vault's control panel. With a deep groan of tortured metal, the massive door began to retract. The air that washed over him was not the recycled sterility of the citadel. It was ancient and cold, carrying a scent like ozone and crushed minerals. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the deck plating, a sound that felt less heard and more perceived, a deep thrumming in his bones. He stepped through the threshold, and the vault door sealed shut behind him, plunging him into a cathedral of alien power. The core chamber was a vast sphere carved from the bedrock. Catwalks and diagnostic conduits crisscrossed the void, all converging on the center. And in the center, suspended in a shimmering web of golden energy, was Specimen 734. It was not a machine. It was not a rock. It was a being. It was a creature of crystalline geometry and captive light, its form constantly shifting, a lattice of facets that caught and refracted the glow of the containment field. It was beautiful and terrible, a living star held in chains. Within its core, a soft, pulsating blue light beat like a slow, sorrowful heart. Kalen felt an immediate, instinctive wave of empathy wash over him, a feeling of profound loneliness, of ancient and unending pain. He had spent his life suppressing emotion, burying it under layers of discipline and trauma, but this bypassed all his defenses. It was a silent scream that echoed directly in his soul. He walked to his assigned post, a small console overlooking the containment sphere. The readings were stable, the golden web of energy holding firm. For hours, he stood and watched. He watched the graceful, agonizingly slow turn of the crystalline being. He watched the rhythmic pulse of its blue heart. He was no scientist, but he knew life when he saw it. And he knew imprisonment. Vasior had not found a power source. They had taken a god and chained it to their engine. Then it happened. A flicker. A single, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the deck. On his console, a red light blinked. Containment field flux deviation, 0.003%. The golden web around the creature wavered, and for a split second, its form seemed to distort. The blue light in its heart flared violently, a pulse of raw agony. His comm crackled to life. It was Commander Jorik, head of security, a man Kalen knew from his former life. A man who saw loyalty as a weapon and mercy as a disease. Report, Kalen. What's the status? Minor flux deviation, Commander, Kalen reported, his voice tight. Still within acceptable parameters. The field flickered again, more violently this time. The deviation climbed to 0.04%. The creature's crystalline arms, or what passed for arms, splayed out as if in a seizure. The silent scream in his mind intensified. It's destabilizing. Jorik's voice was sharp, laced with a cold fury. Administrator's orders. If it hits 0.05, you initiate the purge. Do you copy, Kalen? I copy, he said, his hand hovering over the large, red purge control button on his console. The number on the screen ticked to 0.048%. The creature's light began to dim, its beautiful form contracting into a knot of suffering. He saw not a specimen, not a power source, but a living thing being tortured to death. He saw a reflection of every atrocity he had ever been a part of, every life he had helped extinguish in the name of corporate progress. The number hit 0.05%. Execute the purge, Kalen. Now, Jorik roared in his ear. Kalen looked at the purge button. Then he looked at the dying star in the center of the room. He saw a second console, a smaller one marked Auxiliary Power Regulation. It was a maintenance panel meant for engineers. Protocol was clear. His life, his career, what little he had left of it, depended on pressing that red button. He did not press it. In a single, fluid motion, he lunged for the auxiliary console. He slammed his fist against the emergency housing, shattering the protective plastic. Ignoring the blaring alarm that screamed from his own station, he grabbed the thick, insulated handle of the primary energy shunt and forced it upward, redirecting a stream of raw power from the Citadel's backup generators directly into the containment field's emitter grid. It was a crude, dangerous bypass, a move of pure desperation. Sparks erupted from the console, and the lights in the chamber dimmed as the system struggled with the sudden draw. For a moment, he thought he had made things worse. The containment field flared, turning from gold to a blinding white. But then, it stabilized. The violent flickering stopped. The deviation reading on his main console dropped back to 0. The golden web solidified, stronger than before. In the center of the chamber, the crystalline being ceased its convulsions. Its form settled, and the soft, blue light in its heart pulsed once, twice. It was no longer a pulse of pain. It was slow, steady, and filled with something Kalen could only interpret as gratitude. A wave of warmth and quiet wonder washed through him, silencing the alarms and Jorik's enraged shouting in his ear. He had made a choice. He had broken protocol. He had defied a direct order to commit an execution. He had acted on a flicker of compassion he thought had died in him long ago. He looked up at the viewing window high above, where he knew Jorik and the administrator would be watching. He could not see them, but he could feel their fury. He had just signed his own death warrant. And for the first time in a very long time, he did not care. The consequences were immediate. The core chamber's vault door, which had sealed him inside, now became the focal point of a furious assault. He heard the metallic shriek of plasma torches attempting to slice through the locking mechanisms. Heavy, rhythmic thuds echoed through the room as a battering ram was brought to bear. Jorik was not wasting any time. "Kalen, you treasonous filth." Jorik's voice screamed over the chamber's external speakers, bypassing Kalen's helmet comm entirely. "You are relieved of duty. Surrender yourself and the specimen immediately, and Administrator Forlag may show you mercy." Kalen knew what Forlag's mercy looked like. He had delivered it himself on previous assignments. It was a quick death, if you were lucky. He unslung his pulse rifle, the weapon feeling heavier than usual. He was one man, armed with a standard issue rifle, trapped in a room with no exits. His odds were non-existent. He glanced back at the being in the containment field. It floated serenely now, its internal light a calm and steady sapphire. It seemed to be watching him. The feeling of connection, of shared awareness, was stronger than ever. It knew his fate. It knew what was coming through that door. A section of the vault door glowed cherry red, then slumped inward as a cutting torch finally breached the outer layer. Armed security forces, clad in the same gray armor as him, would pour through that gap in moments. He raised his rifle, his training taking over. He would not die on his knees. But before the first soldier could step through the breach, the being moved. It was not a physical movement. It was a shift in reality. The air in the room grew thick, vibrating with an immense, silent power. The crystalline form of the creature, which he now thought of as her, began to glow with an intense, silver light. The golden web of the containment field, the very technology designed to hold a star captive, dissolved. Not with an explosion or a shower of sparks, but with the quiet finality of mist burning off in the morning sun. She was free. She drifted from the center of the chamber, her multifaceted body catching the ambient light and shattering it into 1,000 rainbows. The breach in the door exploded inward, and 3 soldiers spilled into the room, rifles up, targeting Kalen. They never fired. A wall of solid, shimmering light erupted from the floor between Kalen and the soldiers. It was translucent, like warped glass, and the pulse rifle bolts they fired splashed against it harmlessly, dissipating into faint wisps of energy. The soldiers froze, their military discipline utterly failing in the face of such an impossible defense. She drifted closer to Kalen, her light warm and calming. He felt no malice from her, only a fierce, protective intelligence. She had saved him. Now, they were in this together. Fugitives. An unlikely, impossible alliance. Cease fire. Contain the asset. Jorik's voice bellowed, strained with a mix of fury and disbelief. More soldiers tried to push through the doorway. She responded not with violence, but with precision. A thin beam of blue light shot from one of her crystalline tips, striking the control panel for the vault door. The panel exploded in a shower of sparks, and the half-breached door slammed shut with a deafening clang, its emergency locks engaging. They had bought themselves a few minutes. Kalen looked from the sealed door to the magnificent being floating beside him. He could feel her communicating with him, not in words, but in pure intent. Escape. She projected the image of a maintenance conduit hidden behind a utility panel on the far side of the chamber. a path he never would have known existed. All right, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Escape. He led the way, his boots ringing on the catwalk. She followed, a silent, graceful guardian of light. He found the panel she had shown him and tore it open with his bare hands. A dark, narrow tunnel lay beyond, thick with cables and the smell of ozone. It was a path not meant for men, but it was their only way out. He climbed inside, and she phased through the wall after him, her luminous body providing the only light in the oppressive darkness. The maintenance tunnels were a labyrinth, a forgotten circulatory system within the Citadel's body. They crawled and climbed, Kaylin's armor scraping against the narrow confines, her silent light guiding their way. The sounds of pursuit were a constant, muffled clamor behind them, shouted orders, the clang of boots, the distant whine of cutting tools. Jorik was relentless. They moved for what felt like hours, the Citadel's artificial day-night cycle meaningless in the perpetual dark of the service shafts. His body ached, but he was driven by a purpose he had not felt in years. It was no longer about survival. It was about protecting the life that followed him, the life he had inexplicably chosen to save. They emerged into a cavernous junction, a nexus of power conduits and ventilation shafts. It offered multiple paths, but also multiple ambush points. As they crossed an open gantry, a security drone dropped from a shaft above, its optical sensors glowing a malevolent red. Hostile detected, the drone's synthesized voice droned. Lethal force authorized. Its plasma cannon whined as it charged. There was no time to raise his rifle, no time to find cover. The drone fired. Kaylin reacted on pure instinct. He shoved her, the radiant, powerful being of light, into a small alcove between two massive power conduits. He threw his own body in front of the opening, bracing for the impact. It was a conscious act of sacrifice. He would shield her. The plasma bolt struck his side, a blast of incandescent energy that threw him against the wall. His armor glowed white-hot, the composite plates melting and fusing. An agonizing, searing pain shot through his entire body. His vision swam with black spots, and he collapsed to one knee, his rifle clattering to the floor. The drone was already charging for a second shot, a killing blow. Before it could fire, a tendril of sapphire light lashed out from the alcove. It wrapped around the drone, not with force, but with a strange, harmonic resonance. The drone's red eye flickered. Its weapon systems powered down. Its anti-grav lifts sputtered and died. It fell from the air and crashed to the gantry below, a dead piece of metal. She emerged from the alcove and drifted to him. The pain in his side was a roaring fire, and he could smell his own flesh burning. He slumped against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had protected her. He had done one good thing. She floated before him, and he felt a wave of her concern, a sorrow for his injury. One of her crystalline facets extended, touching the scorched, melted armor on his side. A soft, cool blue light flowed from her into the wound. The searing pain did not just dull, it vanished. He watched in disbelief as the blackened edges of the wound began to heal. The melted armor plating seemed to flow back into a semblance of its original shape, cooling and hardening. He tentatively probed the area with his gauntlet hand. The armor was still damaged, but the wound beneath it was gone. There was no pain, only a faint warmth. He looked up at her, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. She had healed him. This being, whom the corporation saw as a mere battery, held the power of creation and restoration. This was the first concrete act of mutual protection. He had shielded her from the plasma. She had mended his broken body. In that moment, a bond was forged, deeper than words, sealed in the shared experience of violence and grace. The trust between them was no longer a question. It was a fact. With renewed strength, Kaylin pushed himself to his feet. He retrieved his rifle, his movements stiff but functional. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder again. They could not stay here. He looked at her, and she pulsed her light and understanding. They descended deeper, following the conduits that led not up toward the inhabited levels, but down, toward the Citadel's foundations and, hopefully, to a way out onto the surface of Ethel itself. Their journey was no longer a frantic escape. It had become a shared ordeal, a pilgrimage through the metallic guts of their prison. They finally found an exit through a waste reclamation port, a large sewer grate that opened onto the moon's desolate surface. Kalen bypassed the lock, and the heavy grate lifted with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a sky the color of dirty slate. A biting, chemical wind whipped into the tunnel, carrying the fine, corrosive dust that coated everything on Ethel. He stepped out, his helmet's filters working overtime to process the toxic atmosphere. The landscape was a nightmare of industrial rape. Strip mines yawned like open wounds in the gray earth. Slag heaps rose like unnatural mountains. The sky was perpetually choked with the exhaust from the terraformers, blotting out the stars and the face of the gas giant Ethel orbited. This was the Eden Vasioar was building, a paradise paved with poison and powered by a captive soul. She emerged after him, her light a beacon of impossible purity in the blighted landscape. The corrosive dust seemed to part around her, repelled by her energy field. For the first time, she was under an open, if not natural, sky. He felt a sense of wonder emanate from her, quickly followed by a profound sadness for the wounded world upon which they stood. They traveled for days. The pursuit from the Citadel seemed to have fallen back, unable or unwilling to track them effectively in the open wasteland. But the moon itself was their enemy. Acid rain fell in sudden, violent squalls, forcing them to take shelter in the skeletal remains of abandoned mining equipment. Razor-edged dust storms rose without warning, blinding and scouring everything in their path. Kalen's survival skills, honed in half a dozen off-world conflicts, were tested to their limits. He found shelter. He navigated by the faint magnetic fields of the planet's core. He scavenged power cells from derelict machinery to keep his armor's life support running. She, in turn, was their salvation. When their water rations ran low, she dipped a crystalline tendril into a pool of stagnant, chemical-laced water. Her blue light infused the pool, and in moments, the water was purified, clean and cold. She was not just a power source. She was life itself, a force of cleansing and restoration in a world dying from poison. Their reliance on each other became absolute. Their nonverbal communication grew more complex, a language of light, feeling, and shared intent. Guided by an instinct he could not explain, an insistent pull from her, they journeyed toward a range of jagged, monolithic peaks on the horizon. These mountains seemed different from the rest of the landscape, less like slag heaps and more like natural formations, ancient and weathered. It was a place the Vasioar survey teams had marked as geologically unstable and worthless. They found an entrance at the base of the largest peak, a fissure partially hidden by a rock slide. The air inside was different, still, cool, and clean. It smelled of deep earth and stone. Her light pulsed with a new intensity, a mixture of homecoming and anticipation. They ventured inside. The fissure opened into a cavern of breathtaking scale. It was a geode the size of a city. The walls, ceiling, and floor were lined with colossal crystals, each one dormant and dark, but humming with a latent, sleeping power. It was a graveyard, or perhaps a nursery, of her kind. In the center of the cavern stood one crystal larger than all the others, a massive, unblemished nexus that pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. She drifted toward the center of the vast chamber, her own light causing faint sympathetic glows in the dormant crystals around them. And there, in the heart of her ancestral home, she finally showed him the truth. She did not speak. She opened his mind. Images, feelings, and knowledge flooded into him. It was not a violent intrusion, but a gentle, overwhelming torrent of understanding. He saw Ethel not as a dead moon, but as a slumbering world seed. He saw her people, the Ethelan, as silent, dreaming guardians, their consciousnesses hibernating within the crystalline lattice of the moon, waiting for the right cosmic alignment to awaken and blossom into a new form of life. He saw the arrival of Vasioar. He saw the drilling machines, like brutal scalpels, piercing the moon's crust. He saw them finding this very cavern, this sacred place. He saw them tear her from her connection to the central nexus, a violent, agonizing amputation. He felt her pain, her confusion, her terror as she was ripped from the collective dream of her people and imprisoned within the cold machinery of the Citadel. The lie was stripped away. Vasioar hadn't discovered an energy source. They had desecrated a cradle. They were torturing a newborn god to power their air conditioners and stock portfolios. Administrator Forlag was not just a ruthless executive. He was a monster committing a sin so profound there was no name for it. Kalen's cynicism, his carefully constructed wall of disillusionment, shattered into dust. He was no longer just a protector. He was a witness to a genocide in progress, and he had a moral cause. As the vision of her capture faded, a memory of his own, long and deeply buried, rose to the surface unbidden. He was younger, his armor black instead of gray, the insignia of Vasioar's elite enforcement division emblazoned on his chest. He was on Xylos, a colony world whose inhabitants had dared to protest their exploitative labor contract. The memory was sharp, visceral. The smell of burning hydroponic farms, the screams of civilians, the chillingly familiar weight of his pulse rifle as he gave the order to open fire. He saw the faces of the people who fell, men and women who had only wanted a fair price for the water they drew from their own world. He had been Forlag's instrument, his butcher. He did not fight the memory. He let it consume him, and in his mind, he offered it to her. A confession, a plea for understanding. This is what I was. This is the scar I carry. She responded not with judgment, but with a wave of deep, sorrowful empathy. She showed him a flaw in her own crystalline structure, a faint, dark fracture near her core, the scar from her own violent separation from the Nexus. She was showing him that she, too, was broken. In the silent, glowing heart of the dead moon, a disgraced soldier and a captive god shared their scars. Their bond was now unbreakable, forged in mutual trauma and a shared desire for justice. They were no longer just allies. They were kin. Their sanctuary did not remain hidden for long. The respite was shattered by the distant, unmistakable sound of drilling, followed by the concussive boom of explosives. Jork had found them. A section of the cavern wall far from the entrance imploded, showering the chamber with rock and dust. Through the breach, armored figures rappelled down, their helmet lamps cutting sharp, sterile beams through the sacred dimness. Kalen. Jorik's amplified voice echoed through the vast space, dripping with personal venom. There is nowhere left to run. You chose to align yourself with a monster. Now you will die with it. Kalen shoved her behind the central Nexus crystal. Stay back, he sent, a thought projected with all the force of his will. He raised his rifle. His fight was not just for her anymore. It was for this entire sleeping world. The battle was short and brutal. Jorik's men were corporate soldiers, trained for suppression, not for combat against a veteran of the Outer Rim Wars. Kalen used the crystalline terrain to his advantage, moving between the massive shards like a wraith. He was precise, efficient, disabling his opponents with targeted shots to weapon systems and limb joints. He was not the butcher of Xylos anymore. He would not kill if he could avoid it. But Jorik was different. He fought with a fanatic's rage, advancing relentlessly, his heavy plasma repeaters spewing bolts of energy that gouged molten scars into the ancient crystals. He and Kalen finally met near the base of the Nexus, there passed a palpable thing between them. You were the best of us, Kalen. Jorik spat, his faceplate retracted to reveal a face contorted with hate. You enforced the order that keeps humanity thriving. And you threw it all away for a glowing rock. You call this thriving? Kalen retorted, parrying a blow from Jorik's rifle stock. This is a tomb. We're grave robbers, Jorik, and you're too blind to see it. Their fight was a clumsy, desperate thing. Kalen was outmatched by Jorik's heavier armor and weaponry, but he was smarter, more experienced. He managed to disarm the commander, but Jorik tackled him, and they fell to the cavern floor, trading blows that rang like hammers on anvils against their helmets. As Jorik's armored glove closed around his throat, pinning him down, the cavern was suddenly filled with an overwhelming blue light. The air thrummed with power. She had intervened. A controlled, non-lethal pulse of pure energy radiated from her. It did not harm the soldiers, but it overloaded their powered armor and weapon systems. Jorik's suit seized up, its internal mechanics freezing solid. He was trapped inside his own armor, paralyzed. The other soldiers collapsed as their suits failed. The drilling machines at the breach sputtered and went silent. The immediate threat was neutralized, but Kalen could feel the cost. The light from her core dimmed significantly. She had expended a vast amount of her energy to save him again. She was weakened, vulnerable. A new alarm suddenly blared, not from the cavern, but from the citadel itself. A deep, resonant klaxon that vibrated through the very bedrock of the moon. Kalen's old command codes were still active in his helmet's comm system, and a priority alert message flashed across his visor. It was from Administrator Forlag, broadcast across all channels. To all VCOR personnel, Forlag's voice was cold, utterly devoid of emotion. The asset, Specimen 734, has proven unstable and hostile. Its containment has failed. To prevent its power from falling into rival hands, and to cleanse this moon of its unpredictable influence, I have initiated the sterilization protocol. The Citadel's primary reactor is being set to overload. Detonation in 30 minutes. May the corporation's future be forged from our sacrifice. Kalen felt a chill colder than any vacuum. Forlag was going to blow the moon apart. He was going to destroy her, her sleeping people, the entire VCOR facility, and everyone in it, simply to cover his crimes and erase an asset from his ledger. A direct assault on the Citadel was impossible. They had no ship, no way to get there in time, and no way to fight through the remaining security. The war was unwinnable. The stakes were no longer about escape. They were about total annihilation. As the moon began to tremble with the first signs of the reactor's instability, she projected one final, terrible truth into his mind. There was a way to stop it. A way to save her people and the moon. But the cost was absolute. The central nexus crystal was not just a focal point. It was a regulator, a heart. It could absorb and redistribute energy on a planetary scale. It could absorb the Citadel reactor's overload, calming the storm and using the immense surge of power to reawaken the other ethylene. But it needed a consciousness to guide it, a living mind to act as a bridge between the organic and the inorganic, to process the torrent of energy and prevent it from shattering the entire network. It required a pilot, a mind with the discipline to withstand the energy, the empathy to connect with the sleeping consciousnesses, and the will to protect them. The process was permanent. The consciousness would be subsumed, integrated into the crystalline matrix. The individual would cease to exist, their mind becoming one with the moon, a silent, eternal guardian. She could not do it herself. Her energy signature was too compatible. She would simply dissolve back into the collective without the ability to direct the flow. It had to be an outsider. It had to be a mind of will and flesh. It had to be him. The impossible choice was presented. His life, his identity, for the future of a world he had only just discovered. Kalen stood before the great Nexus crystal. It pulsed with a soft, inviting light, a stark contrast to the violent tremors that now shook the cavern with increasing frequency. Dust and small shards of crystal rained down from the ceiling. Outside this sanctuary, a world was dying. Inside, he held its only salvation in his hands. He looked at his gauntlets, scarred from 100 battles fought for greed and lies. His life had been a ledger of violence, a series of compromises that had eroded his soul until there was almost nothing left. He had come to Ethel to disappear, to live out his days as a ghost in a machine, haunted by the man he used to be. He had expected to die here, forgotten and alone, a fitting end for a corporate butcher. He had not expected this. He had not expected a chance at redemption. He thought of the faces on Xylos, the memory she had helped him confront. He could not undo the deaths he had caused, the lives he had shattered. That blood would be on his hands forever. But he could prevent another genocide. He could use the skills and the discipline forged in him by the corporation to defy it one last time. He could turn their greatest weapon, a broken soldier, against them. He looked over at her. Her light was faint now, her form wavering with exhaustion. She had given so much to protect him. She watched him, her radiant being filled with a sorrow so deep it was a physical weight in the air. She had not asked this of him. She had simply presented the truth, the only available path. The choice was his alone. Was it even a choice? To live a few more hours, only to be vaporized in the reactor's blast? Or to embrace this final, meaningful act? To trade a broken, empty life for a universe of new ones? To become something more than a man with a gun? To become a protector in the truest sense of the word? His internal deliberation was a silent, swift storm. The conflict that had raged within him for years, the cynical soldier versus the man who still remembered what honor felt like, reached its conclusion. There was no grand revelation, no flash of divine insight. There was only a quiet, solemn acceptance, a sense of peace. He walked over to her, his heavy boots crunching on the crystalline floor. The ground lurched violently, throwing him off balance, but he did not fall. He reached out and placed his palm against one of her smooth, warm facets. He did not need words. His decision, his resolve, his acceptance of his fate flowed through that point of contact. He projected his intent, a silent promise. I will do it. For you. For them. She responded with a pulse of deep, mournful indigo. It was a color of profound gratitude and heartbreaking loss. In that single pulse of light, she conveyed everything. Her sorrow that this was necessary. Her respect for his sacrifice. Her promise that he would not be forgotten. They stood there for a long moment as the world fell apart around them, a soldier and a star, sharing a final, silent farewell. The time for deliberation was over. The moon screamed its agony as the Citadel's reactor approached critical mass. The Nexus cavern had become a storm of falling rock and raw seismic energy. Through the breach Jorik had created, Kalen could see the sky flashing with unnatural lightning as the planet's magnetic field began to buckle. It is time, he thought, the message directed at her. She pulsed her light in agreement. Her duty was not yet done. As Kalen turned toward the Nexus crystal, she moved to the breach in the cavern wall. More of Jorik's forces, those who had recovered from the initial pulse, were trying to regroup, their fanaticism overriding their survival instincts. And Jorik himself, his armor rebooting, was staggering to his feet, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending rage. Traitor! He roared, his voice cracking with strain. Whatever you're planning, I will not allow it. She met their advance. She did not attack, but she formed a barrier of impenetrable light, a shimmering, translucent wall that held back the tide of their fury. She was buying him the seconds he needed, her own fading energy focused into one last defensive act. Kalen walked to the Nexus. The great crystal seemed to call to him, its gentle thrumming a siren's song in the chaos. It felt like coming home. He placed his hands flat against its smooth, impossibly vast surface. It was cool to the touch, like ancient stone, but it vibrated with a life that resonated deep within his bones. He closed his eyes. He let go. The process began not with a bang, but with a breath. He felt the crystal accept him, drawing his consciousness out of his body. Light, pure and white and absolute, erupted from his points of contact, engulfing him completely. It was not a burning heat, but a transformative fire. He felt his physical form dissolving, his armor, his flesh, his bones breaking down into their constituent atoms and being woven into the crystalline lattice. The pain was beyond any scale he had ever known, a feeling of being simultaneously shattered and remade 1,000,000,000,000 times over. But beneath the pain was a vast, expanding awareness. His mind, no longer bound by the cage of his skull, stretched out, unfurling like a galactic nebula. He felt the cavern. He felt the mountains. He felt the poisoned dust and the sterile, metal shell of the citadel. He felt the entire moon, every rock, every sleeping crystal, as if it were his own body. Jorik, seeing what was happening, let out a final, desperate scream of rage. He raised his reactivated plasma repeater and fired wildly at the blinding light that had once been Kalen. Die, damn you. The incandescent bolts of plasma flew toward the Nexus, but they never reached it. They dissolved a few feet from the surface, their energy harmlessly absorbed into the growing field of Kalen's new consciousness. The commander's hatred was nothing against the dawning of a new god. Kalen's awareness finally touched the source of the moon's agony, the Citadel's reactor. It was a cancerous, throbbing tumor of runaway fission, a screaming vortex of energy on the verge of tearing the world apart. His old instincts, the instincts of a soldier, told him to destroy it, to crush it. But his new perception, the vast, interconnected empathy of the Nexus, showed him a different way. He did not fight the energy. He embraced it. Reaching out with 1,000,000 invisible tendrils of will, he connected to the overloading core. He did not smother it. He calmed it. He absorbed the torrential, chaotic flood of radiation, drawing it into himself, into the vast, stable matrix of the moon's crystal network. He took the storm and gave it purpose. He turned the weapon of destruction into the spark of creation. High above, in the command center of Citadel 7, Administrator Forlag watched his monitors in disbelief. The critical overload warnings vanished. The seismic alerts fell silent. The reactor output, which had been screaming into the red, dropped to a perfectly stable, inert state. The sterilization protocol had failed. He had not just lost control of the asset. He had lost control of his own power source. The moon was no longer his. In the cavern, the ground stopped shaking. The unnatural lightning in the sky faded. Jorik stood frozen, his weapon lowered, staring at the spot where Kalen had been. Kalen's physical form was gone, completely consumed. In its place, within the heart of the great Nexus crystal, a new, steady star of light now burned, a pinpoint of brilliant silver in the deep blue. The war was over. The sacrifice was complete. 10 years passed. Ethel was no longer a dead, gray moon. It was a world reborn, a testament to a miracle. The toxic dust had settled, neutralized and integrated into a new, crystalline soil. From this soil grew flora of a kind never before seen by human eyes. Plants that resembled glowing, multifaceted crystals, pulsing with soft internal light. They grew in vast, silent forests, their light painting the landscape in shades of sapphire, emerald, and amethyst. The sky, once choked with industrial smog, was now a clear, deep violet, and through it, the serene face of the gas giant looked down like a proud parent. Vasior was a memory, exposed by Chief Engineer Eris, who had secretly recorded Administrator Forlag's final transmission. The corporation had collapsed under the weight of its crimes. Its assets were seized, its executives prosecuted. Forlag himself had disappeared, a fugitive from his own fallen empire. A new presence orbited Ethel now. A research and observation station, a joint effort between the new interstellar authority and the awakened Ethelin. For Lyra's people had, indeed, awakened. Stirred from their long slumber by the wave of life-giving energy Kalen had channeled, they had emerged from their dormant crystals. They were beings of grace and immense wisdom, communicating through resonant light and empathetic projection. They moved across their blooming world, tending to the new life, their forms like living sculptures of starlight. Humanity and the Ethelin coexisted in a state of peaceful, respectful observation. The humans studied the miracle of the moon's transformation, learning lessons about life and energy that would reshape their understanding of the universe. The Ethelin, in turn, observed the curious, fleeting, passionate race that had produced both their tormentor and their savior. The Nexus Cavern was now the most sacred place on Ethel, a sanctuary known as the Guardian's Heart. It was left untouched, a place of pilgrimage and remembrance. Lyra stood at the center of the cavern, before the great Nexus crystal. She was whole now, her energy fully restored, her connection to her people renewed. But she often came here, to this quiet, hallowed space. She looked at the unwavering silver star that burned within the crystal's core. The light that was Kalen. He was still there. His consciousness was the moon. He was the quiet hum of energy in the soil, the gentle pulse of light in the flora, the silent guardian who kept the world in balance. He could not speak in words, but he was not gone. His presence was a constant, a feeling of serene, watchful peace that permeated everything. She reached out, her own crystalline form touching the surface of the Nexus. A wave of shared existence flowed between them, a silent conversation between the star he had saved and the man who had become a world. There was no sadness in the communion, only a deep and abiding peace. His sacrifice had not been an end, but a transformation. He had traded his solitary, painful existence for a timeless, universal one. He had become a symbol, a quiet hero whose legacy was not a statue or a name in a history file, but a living, breathing world at peace. Outside, under the violet sky, the crystal forests of Ethel glowed with a soft, eternal light, a silent, enduring monument to the jaded soldier who had found his soul by giving it away. His war was finally over.